Hey there, podcast family. We are back for another episode of the River Valley Podcast. I'm very lucky. I have two dear friends of mine here today to talk about our topic. Way over there, you're familiar with her. You know her. You love her. Natalie Goins. Nat, how are you?
Good. Yeah, doing good.
A frequent flyer. Nat, I think that you probably are like number one as far as people that have been on the podcast, I'd imagine. You or your brother?
Number one in which way?
Oh, I'm sorry. Number one. Yeah.
Number one, like worst?
Most appearances.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, because I do feel like it's been a little while.
It has, but you chalked up a lot, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, number one in our hearts. And then Adam, not your first time, right?
It's not my first time
on the podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I spoke this summer, I think.
Okay, cool. Well, Adam Ellis here, serving out at our Murphy campus. So, listeners, if you've been following us, you know what we like to do on this element of the podcast. The other one's the Stories podcast. I've asked our staff members to take a month, take a topic that they are passionate about, invite a guest, and we're going to talk about it. And that's where we are today, and we are diving into the topic of singleness. Adam, my question to you, why?
Yeah, I think singleness as a topic in ministry is something that is not always talked about, or if it is talked about, usually has a lot of negative connotations to it. And so just really wanting to dive deeper into what it looks like to be single in ministry, what it looks like to, not just in ministry, but as a believer, what does it look like to be single in a culture that has really pushed marriage? And if a person maybe isn't called to be married, or hasn't maybe found the person to get married to, there's this idea that to be whole you have to get married, and so we see a lot of young people rush into it, which doesn't always end up like the fairy tales say it should.
Often it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that idea of marriage is the finish line, right? I have obtained what I've been looking for, and yeah. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and when he says culture, I'm thinking you're saying church culture, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because almost there's like this opposite message in the world, which is, we can dive into that a little bit later in the podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, church culture pushing marriage a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, and we were kind of talking before, two things, a disclaimer, two things we're not wanting to do, right? We're not wanting this to be a bitter rant, and we're not wanting to necessarily marriage bash, but what we are wanting to do, I think, is fortify this idea of singleness and correct some myths, correct some, I don't know if you'd go as far to say like poor theology or poor views of singleness, because I think all around, I mean, there's people that pity single people, and then different manners of that, and it just isn't life-giving, and it's not correct. And so we are wanting to address those, but in no way is this a bash.
Well, we just want to restore the message of the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
It's always good to do that.
Yeah. And so.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and kick it off. We can go ladies first if we want. Just your testimony of singleness.
Yeah. So I would say just growing up, I grew up in the church, and obviously, and always had so many, or just such great community around me, and my siblings too. And we always say that like my parents did a lot of raising with us, but like the church really raised me, Tyler, Nicole, and Cody. And so we just really spent a lot of time with families, and were mentored by other people and all of that. And so we really felt like we were raised by the River Valley church family. And so always around community, and families always taking us in. And then went through our middle school and high school group, and just had a really great group of friends. And so I never found myself like, I don't know, like I would say needing to date. And I never found myself really desiring to do much of that either, just because I just really loved hanging out with my friends and being around families and this and that. And so there were others around me that did a lot of dating, and that was totally fine. But it was just, I guess I never really felt the need, just because I was very full of companionship already, I guess. And, But then in college, it was similar. Like and God was so gracious, like gave me a really good group of friends in college as well. And again, just felt like all my companionship and intimacy needs were met. And I just, I just felt as if that wasn't a huge desire of mine, even in college too, and all at the same time forming really life-giving friendships with girls and guys, and so, but still at the very same time would always receive these subtle messages of, why haven't you dated? Or when are you going to date? Or that guy is cute. Why aren't you going for him? Or he's pursuing you. Why are you pushing away? Like all these things. And that's well-meaning and all of that. But I just never felt a huge desire growing up, probably because I had received the full benefits of Christian community, filling all those emotional and relational needs for myself. And so I know that's not always the case with people, and I'm also not saying that if you date young, you're not getting the benefits of Christian community, but I just had a really good experience with wonderful people in my life growing up, and was really full. My tank was full always, and so at the same time, in college, I started realizing how much I loved doing ministry, and I never had time to date because I loved doing ministry. And I always found a little bit of a weird guilt with that in some ways. But when I read the New Testament, seeing people like Jesus and Paul also seeming to be filling their plate with the things of ministry while not having a wife, as far as we're aware. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, not having a wife. And so anyways, I think I just... I heard certain messages, but in my life, I felt like things were falling well into place, and in my identity and my calling, not dating or being married. And I think it was weird because I did feel some guilt with that, but I couldn't see any scripture to point to why I should feel guilt with that. And so anyways, I don't know, that was kind of a smorgasbord of stuff, but that's kind of, anyway, so going through my 20s here at River Valley, I have, I'm kind of like, obviously my whole 20s has been a lot of ministry, not a ton of like open time, and that's changing a little bit, but I've always had families that have taken me in, like always had families that have me over for dinner, or my sister, even my brothers before they were married and all of that. And so I've never felt the deep pains of not being married. And if anything, I've been able to really flourish with my time, not being in a relationship like that, and in ministry life as well. And so, so I guess it's just been really fulfilling, like not being married. However, I'm not like totally ruling it out, but I'm not crying into my beer every night because I'm not married. You know what I mean? So it's just been a really fulfilling life for me, I guess. So. Did that answer this testimonial? Okay.
Oh, yeah, no, totally.
Okay.
I had some thoughts that I thought of when you were saying that, but I think they might get addressed later. So I want to hear your story, Adam, and then...
Yeah, I mean, I think I went about it a different approach. I think in high school I dated off and on, but I was really busy. I, was doing sports, was doing 4-H, was in student leadership, always involved with youth group, always being filled to the brim. My schedule was, and so there wasn't really time for dating. So it was like if I was dating a girl, like it was very much a like afterthought with everything else going on in my schedule. So clearly those relationships didn't last because an afterthought's probably not a good way to start a relationship. And then I went to college and dated off and on. My first year at Simpson, I went on a lot of first dates, and my roommates made a list of just like, oh, there's Adam again. There's not proud of it, but it was just like, okay, like I didn't go really through the dating scene as much in high school. Like it wasn't a priority for me. But that's just the thing that you do, get your ring by spring at a private Christian college. Yeah. And in my mind, like that was kind of the plan. And after that year, I really focused on on myself a little bit. Not and really was trying to figure out, like what am I wanting out of life? Like where am I going? And ended up in a couple pretty serious relationships, and but every single time I'd get in a relationship, I was also involved in ministry, and like Natalie was saying, like ministry was my heart, ministry was my calling, and I remember at one point I was dating this girl for about a year, and we were talking about marriage. We were talking about, our life together and what our future looked like. And the realization was that my call to full-time vocational ministry, and her desire for family and comfort and all of these things that really the world is able to provide, and ministry jobs don't always pay the most. I wasn't going to be able to provide those things. And so after weeks of just really long, heartfelt conversations where there were a lot of tears, mostly by me, we realized like what we were wanting out of life just wasn't lining up. And it was heartbreaking, and was part of me was letting go of this all-American dream that we grow up with, this idea that to be full and to be fulfilled, you have to have the wife and 2.5 kids and a white picket fence, and in that moment I was letting go of those things and saying yes to serving in ministry. And not that the two of them were mutually exclusive. I mean, clearly a lot of people are able to make it work, but for me, where I was at, the type of ministry that I was doing, there was a lot of commitment outside the 9 to 5, and my heart and just who I am as a person. Like I've never sat in a ministry job and been like, all right, clock that last 40th hour, like I'm going home today. Like that just isn't who I am. And I don't feel like for me to be in a ministry position and for that to become who I am, like I would really be doing what God had called me to do to the full extent of who I am. And so since then, been in some other relationships, had some very similar conversations about what it looks like to be in a relationship and also in ministry, and I'm sure that there's some unhealthy habits that I've built up that have caused some of those conversations, but just that realization that for me, what I'm able to do right now in ministry, working at River Valley, working at the Outback, and I've had opportunities to coach and just even travel the world because of my singleness. And each door that I've walked through, like I've had a lot of people be like, you're so busy, like how do you have time for yourself? And for me, like that busyness is where I thrive. Like that's where I get energized, that's where I get excited, because I'm able to see lives transformed, and that realization of opportunity and what that opportunity brings has just really become, for me, a reason why I really cherish my singleness. Yeah. And we will probably talk more about it. Just, I mean, there are times where it's like, oh, it'd be really nice to like have someone to come home to, or or see a future with kids, but that's not what's in my life right now. And so just seeing that opportunity that singleness has brought me has just been really cool and encouraging. And
nice.
And so there's a lot more to the story, but.
Yeah. I like what you said, and this embodies what you said too. It's not in your life right now, and what I'm hearing from both of you is, could marriage happen down the road? Maybe, but what you're not doing is sitting at the window looking for Prince or Princess Charming. You guys have a life and a calling ahead of you right now, and you're just charging into that. And if it happens,
absolutely, yeah,
cool, and you'd be open to it. But if it doesn't, cool, and you're open to it. Did you have any thoughts to what he was saying?
No, yeah.
So I have a few things that I'd kind of picked up from the testimonies that you guys shared. One, I'm going to play spoiler. It is one of the 7 myths of singleness you're going to get into, but you brought it up in yours. This idea, you said that intimacy, like you definitely felt that intimacy in relationship in your life. And so and one of the 7 myths that we're going to get to is that being single, you don't experience intimacy. And so I kind of, maybe if you guys would want to see how healthy intimacy has looked in your guys' life, maybe elaborate a little bit on what you were saying as far as the fellowship and community that you guys have had.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think for married people get to experience like a depth of intimacy, like none other, obviously, in body and mind, and it's a depth of intimacy. But singles experience the breadth of intimacy. I think being able to sustain a large amount of relationships that maybe wouldn't be most healthy for married people to sustain. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that we see with Paul, that we see with, maybe even Jesus himself. I think that what culture shows us is that you can have a lot of sex and no true intimacy. Yeah. And I think what we are offered in the Christian life is that you could have a lot of intimacy outside of sex. And so I think that's really, really important. I don't think any human being can live without intimacy. Like, I think it's one of our core needs, whether you're extrovert, introvert, touchy-feely, not touchy-feely. I think everyone needs intimacy. And so I think validating that married people get to enjoy a special type of intimacy, but so do single people. And as singles, I think we have a responsibility to find that in healthy, life-giving ways, that are true to our season of life, I would say.
Oh, I 100% agree. And I think there's also a misconception that single people's intimacy is with other single people. I think that one of the coolest things that I've seen where intimacy really happens is in small groups, life groups, in small groups of community where you have older people, younger people. You have people where you're just doing life with, and when you cry together. And I just remember times in ministry where I just went through some really hard, dark seasons, and I didn't have to go through it alone. And I just remember weeping at one point, and it was like me and 2 of my coworkers in the back hall of a church that I used to work at, and it was like hours that we just wept, and we just and it was that feeling of not being alone, and that intimacy that happened when life is just really done together. One of the most powerful things that I've experienced, and obviously as a single guy, I don't know the intimacy that happens in a marriage. I have lots of friends that are married, and so I can't compare it, but I also know that true intimacy does happen and can be experienced in singleness.
Yeah,
definitely. All right, my only other question I had, and it's like a half-cooked question in my head. So, I would obviously call you guys 2 healthy people in general, healthy single people as well. And I'd imagine that there's had to be some intentionality in pursuing that healthiness in your singleness specifically. And so what intentional things do you think you guys have done to cultivate that healthy singleness? Is that too broad of a question, or does that make sense?
I think it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it, and I'm sure that it's going to be different for every single person. But I think just with creating healthy boundaries in your life, I think really what you're putting into your mind, what you're putting into your head, slash I don't know if that's fully making sense, but the idea that whatever you put into yourself is what you're going to get out. If you're working out and you're just lifting weights all the time, but you're eating garbage, you're not going to get the strength that you're desiring. And just the same, if you're really desiring to be a healthy individual and really wanting to be a healthy single, but all you're doing is reading romance novels and watching The Bachelor, probably not going to be the best way
Yeah.
to like be a healthy, but like healthy person.
Yeah. No, I agree, Adam. As far like, I think, singles enjoy a freedom with their time, money, resources, talents. And I think we, just like any other follower of Jesus, have to learn how to balance and channel those things well, without as much accountability, or without the type of accountability that a married person would probably maintain. I think we have to have life-giving rhythms as well, because there are a lot of people, and I would say in some seasons of my life, that have lived out of an unhealthy singleness, and that's not helpful for God's kingdom, yeah.
And as you were talking right there, I just remember, like, I think we so often think about like, oh, what does it look like to be a single healthy person? But like, how many people are thinking about like, what does it look like to be a healthy married person? Because like it's the same situation. Like if you're like constantly desiring, like if I'm constantly desiring a wife and like constantly desiring like this idol that I put in front of my life, like, and that's what I dwell on all the time, like I'm not going to be a healthy person. Likewise, like if a married man is like constantly idolizing some other person other than his wife, like that's not going to be a healthy marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think where that question came from was to that person out there who's kind of sitting and waiting for marriage to fall in their lap, and just kind of sitting and waiting, like we've talked about. And that's not every single person, but that is a lot of people. And so I appreciate your guys' answers there. All right, Adam. Well, when we were talking, you had mentioned that you'd wanted to talk about these myths or lies of singleness. I apologize. There's only 6 of them now.
Yeah.
But if you just kind of want to share each one of them, and then
absolutely.
thoughts that either of you guys have.
Let me pull up my list. Sam Alberry, a couple of years ago, he's a author, does a lot of work with Gospel Coalition, and from England, lives in Tennessee or something like that now. But just really, guy that has some really good thoughts on singleness. Wrote this book that Natalie actually introduced me to it, and I've bought in this book for so many single people and married people. Like, if you are a person, read this book. But here are the 7 myths, and then we can break down some of them. We don't have to talk about all of them, but singleness is too hard is myth number 1 that he writes about. Singleness requires a special calling. Singleness means no intimacy. We talked about that one. Singleness means no family. Singleness hinders ministry. Singleness wastes your sexuality. And singleness is easy. I don't know. What are your thoughts on singleness is too hard?
I think it's human nature to put our own misconceptions onto other people. Even Paul himself says he wishes others were like himself and single, and I don't think he's meaning it's better or worse. He's just meaning there's a simplicity to it. And so, I haven't experienced singleness to be hard. I think it's been incredibly life-giving for me. There's certainly hard days, I would say, but that might have to do more with feeling isolated in the church sometimes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I would. Well, actually,
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, what would you say are just right along with that are some of the hurdles that you face in singleness, or some of the challenges, I guess? Now, Nat just kind of shared her answer.
Yeah,
but.
no, I think some of the hurdles. I think there's a lot. Example, like we're working on some stuff for men's ministry right now, and I love seeing godly men come together and grow as godly men, but so much emphasis is on what does it look like to be a godly husband? What does it look like to be a godly father? And I think those are really good topics, but at the same time, like being a godly man isn't determined by your parental status or your marital status. Like being a godly man is being a man that seeks after the Lord, and And so I think for me, when we have ministries that are supposed to be for all men, but solely focus on those couple categories, especially when at times, like I remember down in Reading, like I led our life group ministry, which also meant I led our marriage ministry, and I was like a single guy, like opening the doors every week for all these married couples, and and it was just one of those like those things where I would sit through, and it wasn't like like I wish I was there, but it was like, gosh, like I feel like we're sometimes so focused on marriage and like the wholeness that marriage brings that we forget to realize that our single people in ministry are whole beings created by God, created by the Creator, like, and have a purpose within ministry, and we can't just forget them. And I think oftentimes they're either pushed to the side or just ignored.
Yeah, totally. I think if Adam and I would want to say anything to church, like I think capital C church, I think what we see in the Bible is that God uses singles, God uses married people, God uses both. We need both in God's kingdom. Okay, so like we don't just need a ton of single people all over the place. We don't just need a ton of marrieds. We need them both. And married people need single people in their lives. And I need to be part of married people's lives for the full picture of God's kingdom. Because in the Bible, we see both. And we see both ministering to each other and helping each other. And so I think what Adam and I have talked a lot about is this idea that there is an idolatry of marriage in the church and in the family. And, I think it's in First or Second Timothy talks about how beautiful marriage is, and anyone who looks down on marriage, that's a sin. So obviously, Adam and I are not against marriage, and we both are beneficiaries of incredible parents who had great marriages, and we're very grateful for that. And it could very well be a situation for us one day, and that's great. But if we continue idolizing marriage and family in the church, we will alienate singles, not just singles, but people who find themselves same-sex attracted, celibate, who have chosen to take their desires and surrender them to the Lord and just live they get to live as a single person in God's kingdom. We alienate people who have been divorced. We alienate widows. We alienate, people who, maybe they have trauma or abuse in their past and it's just not in the cards for them to be married. We even alienate people who are in relationships where their spouse is not spiritually yoked to them. And so I think that we don't want to alienate any sort of type of person in the church, right? So I'd put this right with, we don't want to alienate women. We don't want to alienate minority groups. So it's kind of, when we talk about a theology of singleness, it's right there with a lot of other areas that we tend to forget about. And so, Adam and I last week just kind of smiled at each other. We were part of a prayer and said, all right, we're going to pray for married people today. And that's fine. Like, that's great. Like, let's pray for married people. But we did just kind of smile at each other because it's not normal for people to be like, let's pray for the single people. And probably people are trying to be sensitive in that way, right? Like,
but your point stands,
exactly. Yeah. And so I think what we're just looking for is there to be a healthy awareness that there are many singles in your congregation that really need family intimacy, care, and a healthy notice. Because again, there are characters all throughout the Bible who were single and big league characters. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah, good word. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of those things that sparks a lot of thought in my brain, because as we're discussing this idea of singleness, especially in the church, I mean, I've walked through a couple different job opportunities that were pretty much handed to me until they realized that I was single.
Wow.
And I sat there trying to figure out, knowing that I was called to ministry, knowing that I was called to walk alongside the sheep, and then to be told that because of my singleness, I wasn't able to move forward in that role.
Man.
And for a lot of my early years in ministry, I really questioned if I was hearing God correctly, because I knew it was something that God had for me, yet I was being told that in my singleness it wasn't an option. And so there were relationships that I had, like where I would date a girl because I was like, I just got to find a wife. Like I just got to, like I can find a wife, then I can be a pastor. That's how it works, right? And and it's taken me a lot of time to just sitting with the Lord and realizing that my calling, and even the listeners calling, like our callings are not dependent on our marital status. And our callings are dependent on God. And so if we are truly listening to him and really are pursuing what he has for us, like it doesn't matter your circumstances of where you're at. Like if God wants you to do something, he's going to provide the opportunity for you to do it.
Yeah.
No, I love that. Adam, continue with taking us through your list.
I think we just talked a little bit about special calling also. I mean,
Yeah.
like we hit it. We hit it.
Yeah.
If you're called to ministry, you're called.
Yeah.
We talked about intimacy. I think family. What does it mean? Like the idea, and it is like when you're single, like you're just alone in your apartment. Like I'm sure you have 20 cats, Natalie. Like just crazy
15.
cat lady. Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I totally. I think that married people have a responsibility to invite singles in their homes, and I think singles have a responsibility to seek out married people. I have noticed an increasingly selfish spirit in me, as far as I just answer to myself for my schedule. Yeah. Like I don't like. And when I spend a lot of time with Rach and Tim and their family, and Rach and Tim every day have to think about each other's get to
Sometimes
think
it's
about think about each other's schedules, and they answer to each other. They are each other's. You know what I mean? And so I think there's a deep maturity that married people have as they, do life with each other covenantally, and so singles need to spend time with married people to get that perspective of how the gospel meets married people and how spiritual formation happens for married people in the day-to-day grind. And also I think it's a responsibility for married people to see how the gospel really meets single people in a very beautiful and unique way vocationally. And I know I had a small group leader all through CAD, or the high school group, Tiffany, and she was single all through, at least, her status was single. She was unmarried all through high school, and she demonstrated a real sufficiency of the gospel to us small group girls. Like Jesus was meeting her every need, and I didn't notice a lack of emotional need from her. She was receiving that from Jesus and friends. I didn't see a lack of family for her. Jesus was meeting that for her. She had a great career. Like she was, moving through the ranks, taking names. Like, and it was really good for us to see that, because I just kind of followed in her footsteps, I feel like. And other small group women were married, and that was a great example to ladies and to girls in their small groups too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think Tim and I were in a small group in high school together, and our leader was single, and there's a lot of availability in there, and and it was amazing.
That's the big one.
And like Natalie was saying, I think married people in the church, like bring the single people in your life into your life.
Yeah.
Like don't just see them as a Sunday morning pew buddy. Like they're like they're part of the family of Christ. But at the same time, like single people, like just because you're single does not mean that you don't have an opportunity to be involved in the body of Christ and be part of the family. I think one of the biggest losses is, again, because of single people's availability, and I'm not going to assume that all single people have a ton of availability. Like,
sure.
But like for the most part, we don't have people we're going home to. And so if you're desiring to be a mom or a dad or be a part of a family. Like, there are so many kids in our communities that need parental figures. And I mean, I look in Grants Pass, like I run Murphy Outback, which is a youth center out in the Murphy area. There's Joe's Place, there's Hearts with the Missions, there's all these organizations that are reaching young people that need moms and dads. And so if you, like, the idea that being single means that you don't get to have kids and you don't get to have families, like, there are so many kids desperate for that parental figure, like, and yeah, it might not be a kid that you're taking home, and you know, and like Tim and Rachel having Claire, like, but at the same time, like, I get a good night's sleep every night, so it's like the best of both worlds.
Well, what I'm hearing from both of you is be intentional with your time that you have, and I think that. On the other side of it, being a beneficiary of your guys' time, I texted Rachel, I was like, all right, we're going to do this podcast. What's a question you want to ask? And she was like, not a question, but let them know how much of our family you two are. And like, Clara's going to grow up, and she's going to have several aunts and uncles, and we're going to have a conversation. All right, aunts and uncles doesn't mean that they're biological, right? Like you guys.
She doesn't need to know that.
You guys are going to be aunts and uncles, and it's just been huge. This is the closest I'm going to get to maybe bashing something that I think could be a problem in the church, but you see it a lot. Young marrieds, they say, all right, we just need to be around other married people. That's the season of life we're in, and we need to be around that. That in itself, not a problem at all. Totally understand. There are obviously different things, especially when you enter into parenthood. Getting plugged in with other moms or dads or other couples, super duper. Like, definitely, it's a networking. But for us, when we got married, we had a lot of single people in our life. So what happened when we got married? Those single people entered into the next phase of life with us. And then we had a kid. And what happened? You guys came around us. And it's just like, I think sometimes there's a kicking to the curb of like, you're just not in the season of life I'm in right now. I don't think you can understand me. Like, you guys are my people. You guys understand me. Like, there was an invite to, hey, join us in our life. And you guys were like, we're going in your life.
Absolutely.
And I just think that's a huge miss sometimes when, again, I totally think there's a need for connecting with people that are in your season of life, but I don't think that means that there's a requirement of marriage or parenthood. Because, like, you get to sleep at night 100%. But that doesn't mean you can't lament and sympathize and have a coffee ready for me.
Absolutely. We'll go after this. We're good.
So anyways, that was just my one. When you read that list of myths, that was the biggest one I know for Rach and I is the family. That we're just, I mean, when we think of our people, our tribe, I think half of the people in that are single people. And I wouldn't change it for the world.
No, I think that's a really good point. And as you were talking about it, I mean, I look back at over the last 12 years, I've been in 19 weddings, and I can think of like 2 or 3 guys that, like, each and every one of those guys, like, I would still consider friends, like, I would still consider important people in my life, but like, I've maybe talked to 2 or 3 of them in the last year, and one of them was asking for a donation for his ministry. So it was like,
was it a marriage ministry?
God, I love it. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
We won't go into names.
So I do have one more question, unless you guys have something you were wanting to talk about.
Well, I think we need to address singles who really hate being single. I think that's really important. I think that the desire for marriage is God-given, and not that every single person has it, and not that you're lame if you don't have it, because I do think God gives people a deep desire to be married, and that's great, you know. And so, I would say not everyone would want to do this podcast and talk about all the benefits of being single, and that's okay. Like, I think for some people it's a very painful reality in their life, and I don't think there's any shame around that. I think it's okay to be like, I don't want this gift. This is not a good gift. I really want to give this gift back, you know? And and I would just say to something that Sam Alberry says in his book that's really good is he says, listen, like, that may be the case, but remember, God is no fool. Like, he understands your life. He sees you. He cares. all through, we see like God seeing Hagar, who in the Old Testament, who was in a really rough spot, and God says, I see you, and Jesus looked specifically at people in vulnerable spots and said, like, I see you, and so yeah, God, I just want single people to know that like God really sees you, and He has flourishing for your life, and He is worthy of our trust, and He will fulfill His purposes for you, whether it's with a spouse or not. And I think there's a deep trust that goes into giving Jesus all the unresolved areas of your life.
Yeah.
Unmet desires are really painful. I have unmet desires in my life that have absolutely nothing to do with marriage, and those are painful places. But yeah, God is no fool. And so I would just say it's okay. John Piper says something that I think is really good. He says, occasionally weep over the life you wish you had, then wash your face and embrace the life you have.
Amen.
And I think it's really important to remember that like it's okay to weep and to pour your heart out to God and be like, this is a horrible season. Okay, wash your face and move forward and embrace the deep, intimate relationship you can have with the Lord right now in your singleness that I would argue is quite unique and so beautiful. And I would say Adam and I both, and I really respect Adam for this reason, but I think you, specifically Adam, have built an incredibly unique intimacy with God in your singleness alone, because God is like your husband. I know that's weird to say, but like...
It's a biblical reference.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
okay. Anyways, so I just think that singles are able to build a very unique walk with God in their singleness alone, which is amazing. Don't waste your gift, is what I would say.
Yeah, and I think like just kind of summarizing my thoughts on like even the myths, like don't feel like you have to rush into anything. I think that, I mean, the amount of conversations I've had this year with friends of mine that just wanted to get married just because, it's the thing to do at 19, 20 years old, and now they're 25, 26, 30 years old, and their life has fallen apart because they didn't, their identity in marriage wasn't based on Christ. It was they wanted to get laid, or they just thought that's what you should do. Like, can I say that on this?
Well, you did, and
no, but
perfect. You're 100%.
Well, you did.
Yeah, no, you're 100%.
Yeah.
Correct, and it's this prize. It's that whole I've made it, and apparently life stops now.
Yeah,
and it doesn't.
And it doesn't, like marriage. Like I remember dating a girl who like had just gotten out of a 3-year relationship and right away was like, let's get married at this point. Let's get and had our whole wedding planned out. And the realization was like, it had nothing to do with me. She had a plan for marriage, and it didn't matter who was on the other side of that altar. She just wanted to get married. And a few months after we broke up, she got married to some other guy, and God bless them. And I'm sure they're doing great. I don't follow up, but like, so I think so many believers, and like especially young believers that grew up in the church, grew up in purity culture, have this idea that marriage is the end result.
Yep. And
marriage really, like, from every person that I've gotten to know that's been married, which is a lot of people, like most of the world, like the wedding day is not the end result. Like that's like the happy point. Like and then like real life happens. And so if your like whole life is built around getting married, like I'm not bashing marriage at all. Like I want that for every single one of you listening. Like that would be awesome, but don't build your identity on getting married.
Yeah, and I think I think it's worth saying that, and Sam Oliberry talks about this, but like some of our social media statuses can be really harmful to single people.
Oh, yeah.
Marriage is the best gift ever. Like things. Okay, so Adam and I don't get the best gift ever till we're married. You know what I mean?
Because we're only half a person.
I know. Like even just like you're my soulmate. Like I don't think that's biblical. And I'm gonna be a little harsh right now, but like, Yeah, I think that there's ways that our captions and statuses can sound really just degrading to single people, or that they have not been welcomed, or they're not part of something really cool quite yet. I'm gonna read this really quick. My friend Brennan posted something that I really liked. She said, marriage, engagements, pregnancy, a new child are all amazing things to celebrate, but they're not the only things to celebrate. Don't forget to celebrate your friend who left a toxic relationship, who went back to school, who's taking steps to heal from trauma, who started seeing a therapist, who left a soul-sucking job, who took their first step on the journey of healing. And I would even say friends who use their singleness well, And so I think that's really important, just to remember, just being careful about some of that.
Yeah, well, language is important. We talked about that too. The things of, encouragement to people. Don't walk up to a married person and say, "Hey, we're going to find you somebody soon."
Yeah,
like
or a single person, you mean?
Yeah, please don't do that to a married couple.
Yeah.
Like, we'll find you someone better. Don't worry.
yeah.
I apologize. Yeah, to both of them.
Yeah.
No, that's a great word from both of you.
Absolutely, and I think we started off like we're not upset that people are married, and we're not like,
Right.
and it was a long process. Like even though like I'm in a spot now that's healthy, like it wasn't overnight. Like there were lots of late night conversations with the Lord of God, like, do you have this for me? Is this something that you have? And it is lots of conversations. It is conversations with married couples, conversations with single people. It's bad dates that remind you, okay, I'm not ready for this. All of the above, but I think for me, like getting to this point was not a journey that I took on my own. Like it was a journey, like I had to submit myself to the Lord over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think bottom line, there are things as a married person, there's things in my life that I miss that I will never get back being a parent.
Yeah.
And there's things that I love, things that you guys don't get to experience. And the same can be said vice versa. And so both of us have those things, and like create room for all of it.
Absolutely.